Hi, Dusky Terry with ITC Midwest here again. As we conclude the Iowa Ideas Conference for 2020, I just want to extend a sincere thank you to the Gazette for creating this forum for such a positive, high-level discussion. All of the presenters and the panelists for contributing to the debate, and certainly to all of you as active participants. I hope and trust that you found the experience to be worthwhile. So the big question for everyone is, now what? My challenge to all of us is to take the key questions and big ideas that were generated at the conference and keep the momentum moving forward. That's the only way the best of these concepts will become reality. Each session included discussion of positive ideas that can eventually become public policy if we work together to make it happen. So please continue to connect with those you've interacted with during our time together and keep the dialogue going. On behalf of all of us at ITC Midwest, thanks again for your participation in this year's Iowa Ideas Conference. We hope to see you all again next year.
Hi, I'm Katie Jensen from UFG Insurance, this year's keynote sponsor. After a year like 2020, there's no better time for us to come together for the 4th annual Iowa Ideas Conference. UFG is proud to sponsor this important learning experience that every Iowan is welcome to be part of. This is an amazing opportunity to address the timeliest issues impacting our state and hear from a variety of perspectives. The voices of our keynote speakers not only serve to unite, but they encourage us to elevate our own ideas and resources in the spirit of making a difference. From the beginning of the conference to the end, we hope you embrace every unique element of this year's event. Fill your cup with renewed inspiration to pursue an even better tomorrow. On behalf of UFG, enjoy the keynote session. Now back to you, Zach.
Good morning and welcome to our closing of the 2020 Iowa Ideas Conference. I'm Zach Kaczarski with the Gazette. We started to build the virtual conference concept in late May, and we hope to have about 500 attendees to consider it a success. By the close of this conference, we've gathered over 1,000 people who are actively engaged in what's happening in the state. So to all of you, thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for weathering all of our initial transitions to tech, which has been truly fun. But I've been struck by the phenomenal conversations that I've been able to jump into over the day and a half. And so thank you also to all of our panelists for sharing insights as well. On behalf of the entire team at the Gazette and the Iowa Idea Events team, thank you for being part of the experience. But it's not over yet. In a couple minutes, we're going to be introducing our closing keynote, David Kennedy, who's going to share national and local perspective on what it takes to build safe, trusting communities. His address comes at a key point in our time, both locally and as a country. After the keynote, we have a social opportunity we hope that you'll stick around for. The Big Ideas Virtual Social will give you a chance to take some of the things that you've consumed over the last day and a half and share those and share ideas with others about what's moved you and what you want to do next. You'll get to choose from 4 virtual rooms, and there'll be a representative in each in what we call our dynamic doers. When in the virtual room, the hosts will share what they're working on and then open it up for conversation for everyone to take part in what's inspired them from the conference. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce another dynamic doer, Rachel Rockwell, the program officer for the SET Fund, and that stands for Safe, Equitable, and Thriving Communities. And that's through the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. The Gazette and the News Division and both the editorial board have been following the work of SET from the launch in 2015. Since then, we've seen it grow into one of the leading youth violence prevention programs in Cedar Rapids. The connection to David Kennedy and his team at the National Network for Safe Communities is one that I will leave to Rachel to explain. Welcome, and thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Zach. It's a great honor to be able to introduce David Kennedy. Today, I first met David in June of 2019 when a group of community members from Cedar Rapids attended the National Network for Safe Communities biannual conference in New York, where we went to learn about what research and what evidence there is around intervening and reducing gun violence and youth violence, to bring that back to our community and figure out how we can implement that. David Kennedy is the executive director of the National Network for Safe Communities and the co-founder. The National Network for Safe Communities is at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. David led the Boston Gun Project, whose Operation Ceasefire intervention was responsible for a 63% reduction in youth homicide victimization, and has since been effectively implemented in numerous cities across the United States through the group violence intervention model, which I'm sure he'll share details on today. David has extended what he has learned and the evidence into communities across the United States to help them reduce violence. GVI is currently being implemented in Chicago, New Orleans, Baltimore, Oakland, and many other cities nationwide. Mr. Kennedy's work has won 2 Ford Foundation Innovations and Government Awards, among many other distinctions. His latest book is Don't Shoot: One Man, a Street Fellowship, and the End of Violence in Inner City America. When I met David, he and his colleagues extended an offer of help to our community, and I'm proud to announce that we are now embarking on assistance through the National Network for Safe Communities to help us to deal with our gun violence and our youth violence problems in our community. And this is an amazing way through the Iowa Ideas Conference to launch this very important work in our community. So David, take it away.
Afternoon, everybody. I am sitting in my socially distanced basement in Brooklyn, New York. I wish I could be with all of you, but this is a not bad second best. And thank you, Rachel, for that very kind introduction. Particularly thanks to the city and the communities of Cedar Rapids for, as you've just heard, committing themselves to this extraordinarily important violence prevention work, and for allowing my office to participate in that, and to the Gazette and to Iowa Ideas for doing what you've done here. We have a saying in our office that we like to work with people who like to work, and we certainly care about ideas. So this is a great combination. So I'm a professor at John Jay College in New York City. I run the National Network, as Rachel said, the National Network for Safe Communities. We are a hands-on applied violence prevention organization. We work with cities and states and nations and community groups and law enforcement and foundations and anybody who will muster themselves to address violence. And we are a violence prevention shop because violence is special. There is no institution, there is no setting that will work as we all wish it to when people are scared. And worse, a neighborhood can't function where there are threshold levels of violence. Schools won't function, hospitals won't function, relationships won't function. Nations will not function properly when people are afraid. And that is a foundational threshold commitment that we should all hold. It's in our founding documents. Our founding documents committed us to domestic tranquility. And the National Network is fundamentally in the domestic tranquility business. We work with community violence, we work with domestic violence, institutions, the worst kind of drug markets, where violence and fear and trauma prevents the functioning of the social fabric. That's our commitment. We're in an important national civil rights moment. And violence is a core matter of racial justice and equity. My office is very blunt about this. Violence is visited with massive disproportion on people and communities of color in the United States. Black men are about 6% of the nation. They are about 50% of the homicide dead. If you don't know it yourself, the concentration here and the effect in the lives of communities and families and individuals is shocking. Rachel mentioned my book, Don't Shoot. There's a story in it about a friend and a colleague in Rochester, New York, as a city official, but also a Black grandmother. And she went down to breakfast one morning. She was in her best because she was going to the funeral of a neighborhood elder on the block who had passed. And her very young granddaughter said, "Why are you all dressed up?" And she said, "Because I'm going to this service." And her granddaughter looked at her and said, "Oh, who killed him?" Not what happened, who killed him, because that is the experience in her community. Terrible responses to violence are also a matter of racial justice and equity. We have addressed all of this primarily through criminal justice in recent times. We live in a country where if you do not finish high school, 1 in 3 Black men will go to prison. This is not okay. Communities that have to live with that level of violence and fear and trauma and that level of the failure of our state institutions, none of this is okay. And that is my and my office's commitment. Rachel said she came to our last conference. It was a conference on the science and practice of violence prevention. So we now know how to do this work in a way that didn't used to be true. When I began this 30 years ago, there was nothing in the portfolio that we would now call evidence-based, that we know it works, we have the underlying natural science to prove it. Real people in real settings can do it, they will get results, and the formal social science says, yes, this is real and it works. There are those things now. There is a small but critical body of things we know work. And when Cedar Rapids came calling, we were able to say to them, as we are able to say to others now, we can help you. There is a portfolio here. It is not a program, it's a way of coming at this issue. Everybody who does it makes it their own and figures out how to make it work. But with application and seriousness and professionalism and commitment and goodwill, yes, you can make a big difference here. All of that effective practice is based on an emerging fact about violence and violence dynamics that has become clear over about the last 20 years. We didn't really used to understand this, we do now. It is simple, it is profound, it is transformative, and we now know that it is true in every place in the United States where there is a homicide and gun violence problem. We and others have asked and answered this question over and over and over and over again. In every city, it is the same. My office is working in Newburgh, New York, up the Hudson, an hour north of the city of New York. It's a town of 30,000 people, which on a population basis used to be one of the most dangerous places in the United States. As Rachel has said, we and others are doing this in Baltimore, in Chicago, in Oakland, California, in New York City. They're very different places. This central fact is not different. It's the same everywhere. And that is that homicide and gun violence is concentrated amongst a very, very small population of extremely active folks, most of whom most of the time are not operating as individuals, but they are in recognizable groups and networks of different kinds. My field mostly doesn't work around gangs anymore. We don't think about gangs anymore. Gangs are not a very helpful way, it turns out, of getting at this. But in the sort of ordinary way we've thought about this. The high-risk folks are in gangs, they're in drug crews, they're in little neighborhood sets, they're in crews, they're in cliques, they're in posses. They overwhelmingly are extremely active on the street and criminally in a variety of ways. They are not specialists. They mostly hurt one another, and that cycle of vendetta and retaliation is very familiar to anybody in the community or anybody who's dealt directly with these issues. That's really what drives the action. People think it's about money. Very little of it turns out to be about money. It's respect and disrespect and social friction of different kinds. And that extremely concentrated, extremely active group is very small. And we know the math on this now. Everybody in those groups will be right around 0.5% of the population of the city. And that 0.5% will be associated with 50, 60, 70, 80% of all of the homicide and gun violence in the city. People who study problems talk about the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the issue is 20% of the people. This is extraordinarily lopsided, extraordinarily concentrated. And that concentration of perpetration and victimization can produce fantastic trauma. If you are in this high-risk world, and this is to be found in far too many of our cities and neighborhoods across the country. My colleague Andrew Papachristos, who's a network theoretician at Northwestern University now, has done the math. We now know that if you are a young man in this world, you would be dramatically safer as serving military on the ground in an active theater in Afghanistan than you are walking around in your own neighborhood. The risk, the violence, the concentration is almost literally unbelievable. So that's the problem we need to step up to. If we understand that, we also have come to understand that our fundamental image of dangerous neighborhoods, of dangerous communities, is empirically, scientifically, mathematically incorrect. So I was raised this way, I was taught this way, I was taught about dangerous neighborhoods, I was taught about hotspots. I grew up outside Detroit in the 60s and 70s when Detroit was Murder City, the most dangerous place in the country. White folks like me from the suburbs did not go into Detroit. We knew that you were taking your life in your hands. It wasn't true then, it's not true now, it's not true of these communities. There is no such thing, again, mathematically, scientifically, empirically, there is no such thing as a dangerous community. What we think of as dangerous neighborhoods are overwhelmingly safe. And then they have a very small number of very special people involved in very special dynamics. Those folks are at astronomically high risk. And yes, they miss and they hurt other people from time to time. But if you're not in those networks, for all practical purposes, You are not at risk, your family is not at risk, your neighborhood is not at risk. And as we on the outside have looked in from the outside and said often things like, these are bad places full of bad people, we should be celebrating communities for their resilience. So I said I was direct about this, I will be direct about this. The communities of color and concentrated disadvantage where violence presents itself did not create themselves. They were created by outside forces, they were created by white folks, they were created by government and business that made decisions to make them as they are. They have been oppressed, they have been neglected, and they are subjected to all of the root cause issues that have been recognized forever: bad schools, lack of family support, food deserts, transportation issues, healthcare problems. All of that is true. And they deserve all the help that we can give them. But the fact is that even with all of what has been done to them and all that has not been done for them, folks under these intolerable conditions raise their kids, raise their families, govern their relationships with their neighbors in such a way that literally almost nobody grows up to be part of this high-risk world. And most of them are more afraid and traumatized than they are dangerous. We should celebrate these communities for what they are and how they have resisted all kinds of pressures to be violent. So the violence is overwhelmingly an issue of this small, intense world. And the science and practice of violence prevention that has emerged is what turns out to be a remarkably common sense engagement with that small, intense world. You get a core partnership of city and community and law enforcement and service providers and the folks with the natural standing that comes with being recognized as legitimate in their community. You enter into sustained, direct engagement with these folks at high risk, and you say to them, and you back up what you say. You say, we care about you, we love you, we want you to succeed, you deserve and we want you to be safe, alive, and free. We don't want you hurt, we don't want you to hurt anybody else, we don't want you to go to jail. Your community loves you and absolutely rejects your violence. There is no excuse for the violence. We recognize that most of you do not like this, and we will help you in every way that we can to be safe and to be stable and to be successful in your life. And we are going to put together a very special structure of outreach and support for that. And we're going to tell you ahead of time that if the violence continues, there will be formal consequences. We're going to spell them out for you ahead of time, and we're going to make sure that our reaction to violence is special and that we can actually keep all of these promises. And when we do that, things get better. It's not easy, it's not perfect, we don't know how to fix this. We absolutely know how to reduce it dramatically. And Rachel mentioned Oakland. I've mentioned Oakland a couple of times. Oakland is getting a lot of attention in our world these days. Oakland was a place that people used to have given up on. It was poster child for irreducible violence, intergenerational violence. Oakland's been doing this basic approach for 6 or 7 years now. They have cut homicide and gun violence by close to 60%. And the last time I got an update, they have reduced arrests citywide by 80%. Right? This is what we want. We want more safety. We want less jail. That this should work for everybody. Let me end on this note. We are, as I said, in a moment of civil rights activism around especially policing. There will be no public safety. There will be no sustained progress on this issue when communities don't trust the police. Right? When somebody is at risk, when a community needs help, if they don't have the police to go to or other kinds of support, people will do what they need to do to protect themselves. And that's when people go to guns, that's when violence happens, that's when you begin these patterns of retaliation and vendetta that then become the cycle of community violence. The path to community safety lies through police legitimacy. You cannot have one without the other. And this new approach that we're talking about is a way to the new kind of public safety that people are demanding. It is a way of looking at what we have been doing and recognizing that it has not worked. It is recognizing and saying to communities, we know you are fundamentally sound. We know that almost nobody is dangerous. We know that those who are dangerous are more often at risk and scared, and we have not made them safe, and they are legitimate in their fright. They have been traumatized. They need to be safe. They need to be protected. We're going to turn ourselves inside out to do that. We know that they respect you as the figures you are in the community, and that when you say to them, we need this to stop, they will respect that. And we know that criminal justice and policing is strong medicine. We want to do as little of it as we possibly can, and we are going to be perfectly transparent ahead of time with those who need to understand it about what we will do and under what circumstances, because we want to do as little of that as possible. And in the best of all settings, this work is a way not only of saving lives and creating public safety, it's a way of resetting relationships between communities and police and producing a fundamentally better kind of criminal justice and policing. And I could not be more excited about the beginning of this work in Iowa and in Cedar Rapids. So, thank you.
Well, David, I'll jump in and ask a few questions. And if folks have questions, please submit them using the questions portion in Whova. And I'm curious, you have to have a foundation, and this work involves trust, not only of individuals with police, but also kind of some of the community groups that do this work. And when you come into a community, maybe they've had some local efforts that they've tried and they haven't generated the results, or how do you build that trust among those that are seeking to end that violence cycle, but maybe haven't had the strongest relationships or have different ideas about how to get there?
Well, there isn't any good place that hasn't tried hard around this issue. This is such a dire matter, is such a serious issue that of course people have tried very, very, very hard. It's simply that the ways we have thought about this have not worked up until now. And so wherever there is violence, the fact is there has been often heroic efforts and there has been failure. That's just the way it works. And that history always causes division. And the happy reality is that almost always the commitment to doing something about this awful problem is more than enough to bring people together. the only good thing about violence, in my experience, is that people care about it so much that they will overcome history, they will overcome their own experiences, they will overcome their own narratives, they will overcome failure and betrayal, and a critical mass of the right people will always show up to do the work. And then doing this work together turns out to be very often a transformative experience for the people involved, and even for cities. There's nothing better than actually making headway together on this, and seeing people change, seeing people come together, seeing people very often play against type and not be the sort of people that other folks think they are. The first steps are enormously challenging, and then very often this takes on a really profound life of its own.
Now, you talked about seeing, and maybe folks talking about neighborhoods wrong or incorrectly, and sometimes that's naivete, but sometimes that's maybe a skeptic to this model. What success do you have at addressing kind of the skeptics who maybe question this or don't give it the time to take root?
There's no fancy answer to that. You put the facts in front of people, and the facts, as I've said now, are overwhelming. People didn't believe you could do this when we began it 20 years ago. Rachel said the first time we tried this, we got a nearly 2/3 reduction in youth homicide in Boston, Massachusetts. Within a couple of years, citywide, and people looked at that and said, that can't be true. Well, it was true, and it's been done over and over and over again. You now have groups like the National Academies of Sciences looking at the evaluation record and saying, as a formal matter, this works. So there are lots of facts, there are lots of people to introduce their peers to. If you are playing a particular role in a city and you don't believe this, it's easy to introduce you to your peer in another city who's done this and didn't believe it a little while ago and now is a fervent believer. So there are all sorts of things to do to bring the facts to people. And that doesn't work for everybody. And the fact is, the facts are the facts, and that kind of prejudice, disbelief can no longer be allowed to prevent what we know works. If you went to your doctor and they said, there's a much better therapy for this dire disease that you've got, and all of the journals say so, it's now standard practice in my field, but I kind of don't like it, so I'm not going to treat you, you'd find another doctor. Right? So when people know what's true and they still won't do it, then you go around them and you do it anyway.
What's a typical time frame? You mentioned in that answer 2 years. Is there a typical time frame of how long does it take to stand this up and start to see results?
Well, the pandemic has changed everything. And so we're to some extent in different territory, and the increased estrangement of communities from policing and law enforcement is also changing things. But the work is still important. The work is still getting done. The old answer before both of those things had shifted the ground was that we now know enough about this kind of work that for a project of the scale that Cedar Rapids is undertaking, they ought to be able to be up and running with the intervention within 3, 4, 5 months of really buckling down and beginning the work. And it's often the case that you see concrete results with changes on the ground quite rapidly after that. I think it's reasonable to think that under these current conditions, we may see that slow down a little bit, but we're not talking about years, we're not talking about decades, we are still talking about pretty rapid outcomes.
When you talk about trust in police, you know, we're in an era right now where a lot of these institutions, the trust is being challenged across the board. I mean, I think we're in an era of significant change. But what works when you're trying to rebuild trust in police? Are there a few techniques, or how does that work? What does it take, kind of, to rebuild that trust?
So I'm not going to speak here for anybody in particular, right? So I'm speaking for myself and my office and my own experience. But the fact is, what we've done here has not worked, and that's not just policing. I was astonished when I came to understand the degree of animosity and estrangement that the affected communities have from social workers and social service providers. I was prepared for the anger at policing. I was not prepared to find that they were often even angrier at people who showed up to help them and to do good, because their experience of those people and those institutions was not that they had shown up to do help and to do good. They had not helped. They had made promises they didn't keep. They had said they could help. They couldn't. And they got paid and they got in their cars and then they went home every day, right? None of us have done this right. And the most important thing in our experience is to say to the affected communities, and particularly to that small number of mostly young men who are at highest risk, we have failed you. This is on us. We were paid to do this. We were elected to do it. We are appointed to do it. It's our responsibility, and we didn't do it. We haven't gotten it right. And what we are doing right now is different than that. It is informed by that. We are quite sure that this will be a lot better, but it is explicitly a departure from what we have done before, because that didn't work and often it did damage. And people need to hear that, and they respect it.
When you think about the kind of the help, or, you know, who the right groups are to have around the table to solve some of those underlying issues, how do you how do you design programs? I mean, these are sometimes very flash change of circumstances. How do you design that so that that need can be solved quickly, so that violence doesn't cascade, or, you know, another chain reaction occurs?
Well, the cascade and the chain reaction is on most days what this is all about. And it is making sure that the fundamentals are in place and that there's a scrupulous, relentless attention to what's going on the street and on the ground, so that what you're talking about can be identified and addressed as quickly and effectively as possible. And we like to make this much more complicated than it really is. The work's complicated, and keeping it going and structuring it and institutionalizing it especially is complicated. The actual work is not that hard. And just to say it again, it is a small number of people. They're usually in identifiable groups in the community. What they do is not hidden, you know, for better or for worse. When people get killed and people get shot, that's one of the things we know the most about. It's not like something, for example, like intimate partner violence, which is so easily hidden and so easily controlled by the abusers. You know, people get shot and killed in the neighborhood. We know about it. And if we're looking carefully and we understand that what we need to look for is these extremely high-risk folks, the dynamics with them and their groups, and if we have this core partnership of community actors, community engagement, what we call support and outreach to keep people safe and stable and support them, and the right kind at the end of the day of very limited, very strategic law enforcement, that turns out to be the package. And that can be adapted to pretty much any of these particular circumstances as they present themselves.
How do you, in a community, how do you build that intervention or that the right group of people? How do you identify who they are? Are there right people, or is it simply those that want to be involved? How do you select kind of those intervention?
For the most part, this is going back to your earlier question. Every city, every community is doing this work already. People care passionately about this. And they may be elected and appointed. They may be mayors and city councils and city managers and elected prosecutors and appointed chiefs of police and those sort of folks. They may be already in the social service and service provision business. They may be neighborhood activists. They may be funded or unfunded outreach workers. The people doing this work are already doing this work. And what this does is provide them with a different way of getting at understanding and addressing the problem. You don't need, for the most part, new people. Just to say it again, that the commitment to this issue is profound. And when people recognize that this is an approach that makes sense and enlist together to do it, that's your team right there.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, I think at this point, I appreciate you taking the time with us this morning. I guess one last question is there a time frame for folks, with the project, are boots on the ground and kind of working with folks here? Do you have a time frame kind of established of when the work begins?
So it's underway already in its formative stages, and I'll invite Rachel to jump in because she is formative in these formative stages, but the wheels are turning already.
So I'm acting as liaison between the National Network for Safe Communities and Cedar Rapids in this work, and working with technical advisors have been for a couple of months. We're really looking forward to 1 month from now and November 12th and 13th, where we'll bring stakeholders together for GVI University. And so that's where we'll really solidify those partnerships and those commitments and understand the work in our marching orders, I think. So, and have an understanding of the work that we have ahead of us. So thank you, David.
Yes, thank you, David, for the remarks and the insights and for the work that you're doing in our community as well as elsewhere. And thank you to our Iowa Ideas attendees. There are over 1,000 who have taken part, and they've given a lot to celebrate and to build on. So we're appreciative of that. We will continue to post the recorded sessions from the conference, and we hope that you'll follow the stories. We'll continue to develop stories. We can't do it all in a day or live on news cycle each day. So we'll continue to be developing stories from our journalists that originated in this conference, and we'll publish them at the Gazette and at iowaideas.com. So the Big Ideas virtual socials will begin at noon. There are 4 virtual rooms that you can choose from. Each is hosted by a different organization, and folks are ready to share their experiences, and I hope that you have some that you're willing to share as well. So there are 4. It's Trees Forever and Planting Hope, Iowa Big, Inclusive ICR, and Youthport. And so to everyone, thank you for taking part in this edition of Iowa Ideas, and have a great afternoon.